I didn't expect you to be in this house." Nam-jin's breath came in ragged gasps. Sun-joo stared at the man before her, unable to believe what she was seeing. He had only come to steal a few documents, but he had no idea that Pai Sun-joo was now living there. He entered unaware, and the moment she caught him, the plan shifted from secrecy to crime. "Don't move. I don't want to hurt you." There was no persuasion in his voice, no sincerity, just the cold, creeping realization that everything had gone terribly wrong. That night, Nam-jin disappeared with Sun-joo. She had no idea that she had just become the key to 12.5 billion won. And so begins the story of a man who crossed a line that should never be crossed. All for money. Nam-jin carefully opened the door in the dark. The house was quiet, and he moved through the familiar layout toward the living room. Somewhere in Jin sang Ah's drawers. There had to be the documents he needed for account verification. But what he didn't know was that Pai Sun-joo now lived there. As he grabbed the papers off the table, a sound from behind made him spin around. And there she was. Recognition flashed between them instantly, and the silence that followed turned into tension. "I didn't expect you to be in this house." It wasn't an excuse. It felt more like the moment fate misfired, turning a simple theft into something far more dangerous. Nam-jin gripped Sun-joo's arm tightly and pulled her into a narrow alley. She barely had time to scream before he covered her mouth and shoved her into the car like cargo. The city lights faded behind them, and the silence in the vehicle grew suffocating. Fear and confusion filled Sun-joo's eyes. But Nam-jin refused to meet her gaze. "All I need is you. Just cooperate for a moment." It wasn't persuasion, it was resignation. Sun-joo stared blankly out the window. In her eyes, the fragile peace she had fought for after her war with Jin Sang, was unraveling all over again. That night, she couldn't call anyone. Her voice had vanished from the world. What terrified her more than the ropes on her wrists was not knowing where she was being taken. To Nam-jin, there was only one thing that mattered now: account verification. When they arrived at the basement of a rundown building, Sun-joo was dragged out of the car, her hands still bound. The room was damp and windowless, with nothing but a single laptop, a mobile phone, and a satellite device set on a table. Nam-jin inserted a USB and stared at the login screen of a Swiss bank account. His face tightened with anxiety. Even his breathing became careful. This isn't just any account. It's voice verified, with facial and fingerprint recognition. All registered under Jin Sang, At those words, Sun-joo's eyes widened. Only then did she understand why she had been taken. She was forced to mimic Jin Sang-ah's voice, repeating recorded phrases over and over, until the system accepted them. The air in that room was cold and heavy. It wasn't a lab for stealing money. It was a prison built for manipulating people. It had been a day since Sun-joo disappeared. At first, So-woo thought she was out briefly. But the untouched cup of coffee and the eerie stillness in her room told him something was wrong. He called her over and over. No reply. Then an unknown number lit up his phone. Nam Jin's voice came through, cold and steady. You need to get the company's money ready. A transfer's coming from the Swiss account. Once it hits, assign it to Sun-joo's name. Convert it all into Bitcoin. And send it to the wallet address I give you. If you report this, she won't come back alive. So-woo's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't respond, frozen with panic. But he soon rushed to Jingung Bay, confessing everything. Without a word, the chairman picked up his phone. Find him. Right now. Track that bastard down. The man Jingung Bay called was a trusted detective who had stood by him for years. Someone who had helped him through crises in the past. He listened silently as So-woo explained everything. Then he began gathering data. Sun-joo's last phone activity, nearby CCTV footage. Any trace that could lead to her. The more notorious the criminal, the more traces they tend to leave behind, he said quietly before heading to the outskirts of Seoul. Time passed quickly, and the clues were scarce. But then, a single frame from a car's black box showed them. Near an abandoned factory, a man resembling Nam Jin was seen dragging a woman. Sun-joo's head was down, her movements forced, while Nam Jin scanned the area nervously. This is the place, the detective said, firm and clear. So-woo didn't hesitate. He stood up immediately. In that moment, he wasn't driven by fear, but by the need to bring one person back. So-woo steadied his breath as he got into the car. The fading sunset spilled across the road. Strangely calm. But inside him, his heart pounded relentlessly. She has to be safe, please. He repeated the words in his mind, gripping his cold phone tightly. Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, Sun-joo sat slumped against the wall. Her wrists were still bound, and Nam Jin, having finished the account transfer, had dozed off nearby. She took shallow breaths, scanning her surroundings in silence. Outside, darkness had already fallen, and somewhere, an old iron door rattled in the wind. Is someone looking for me? That single thought was her lifeline. And at that very moment, So-woo's car turned down the final alley. Their timelines, once broken, were beginning to realign. As the car came to a stop, So-woo stepped out without a word. He moved quietly along a narrow path, between rusted metal and overgrown weeds behind the factory. Every step felt steady, but his breath grew shallower with each one. Inside the warehouse, the silence was heavy. Not peace, but pressure. He paused, peering through the slightly open steel door. There, he saw a faint figure slumped against the wall. It was Sun-joo. Her head was down, her body still bound. His heart pounded, and the small flashlight in his hand trembled. But before he could move closer, a presence stirred deeper inside. Something shifted. The air grew sharper. Nam-jin opened his eyes, his senses flaring at the sound of footsteps outside. Slowly he reached into his pocket. There, his fingers wrapped around a cold iron pipe. Nam-jin rose quietly. His shoulders were tense, his eyes sharp like a predator sensing its prey. He glanced at Sun-joo, then slowly turned toward the door. Each step was slow, weighted with calculation and caution. Outside, a flicker of light passed the door. Nam-jin pressed himself behind a steel pillar, holding his breath. Inside, Sun-joo stirred. She had heard something. A soft footstep, a familiar rhythm in the dark. Her eyes opened slowly. She didn't speak. She listened. And then, a breath steady, known. It struck her chest like thunder. So-woo? The name echoed in her mind. Hope returned to her eyes. But at the same moment, the warehouse atmosphere shifted. A presence went quiet. The silence turned sharp. This was the calm before the storm. Sun-joo slowly moved her bound wrists. The rope that had held her for hours felt slightly looser now. A shift so subtle only her fingertips could tell. She sensed it, and instead of fear, she clung to that sliver of opportunity. Carefully, she began working her fingers through the knot. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance. But she focused, choosing hope over panic. Then, a soft creak. The door opened just slightly, letting in a sliver of light. So-woo stepped inside. His face was grim, one hand holding a flashlight, the other gripping a short, dull metal pipe. He moved carefully, but just as he took a step forward, something swept past him. Fast, silent. Sun-joo froze. Nam-jin was already moving. Like a shadow, the hunt had begun. And now, it would come down to a single moment. Who would strike first? Deep within the warehouse, a small laptop screen lit up with a message. Transaction complete. Nam-jin's lips curled into a quiet smile. 12.5 billion. All of it had just landed in his crypto wallet. He let out a slow breath. momentarily lowering the iron pipe from his hand. For a second, it seemed like the tension had broken. But at the same time, Sun-joo felt the last loop of rope slip free from her wrists. She inhaled softly, eyes wide. So-woo, hidden in the shadows, was trying to pinpoint Nam-jin's position. They couldn't see each other, but the pressure in the air was as sharp as a blade. Nam-jin picked the pipe back up and stepped forward. "This is your end, Kim So-woo." His voice echoed through the warehouse. And in that single moment, all three of them stopped breathing. The creak of the steel door filled the warehouse. From the shadows, So-woo's silhouette emerged, and so did Nam-jin's. For a few tense seconds, neither of them spoke. Only their breaths cut through the silence, and the iron pipe in Nam-jin's hand trembled slightly. "Where's Pai Sun-joo?" So-woo's voice was low but steady. It held less anger than fear. Nam-jin let out a short laugh, gesturing toward the glowing laptop screen. "That money you all fought so hard to protect? It's mine now." So-woo's gaze wavered, but he stepped forward. It was never about the money. It was about the people. Something flickered in Nam-jin's eyes. And then, as if on cue, they closed the gap. The first strike was moments away. Nam-jin struck first. The iron pipe sliced through the air, and So-woo barely dodged, twisting his body aside. But he couldn't avoid it for long. A sharp blow to his abdomen sent him crashing to the ground. His breath caught in his throat, each gasp a knife to the ribs. Nam-jin advanced without mercy, raising the pipe again for another swing. Meanwhile, behind a pillar, Sun-joo watched every move with razor focus. Her wrists were free now, and her eyes locked onto a chunk of stone lying in the corner. Now or never. She crouched low, moving quietly, calculating each breath. On the floor, So-woo looked up through blurred vision and caught the faint outline of Sun-joo's form. For a brief second, their eyes met, and it was enough. Enough to know she was still fighting. Nam-jin took a breath. A blood-streaked smirk formed on his lips, and he raised the iron pipe once more. So-woo lay on the floor, gasping, as the shadow above him crept closer. "This is it, So-woo. You were never anything to me." The words weren't a threat. They were a sentence. Nam-jin lifted the pipe high over So-woo's head. And then, a heavy thud echoed through the warehouse. A sharp crack. Nam-jin staggered sideways and fell. Sun-joo stood behind him, stone in hand, breathing hard. She had struck him with everything she had, and the force of it left her trembling on the ground beside him. Her breath was ragged, but her eyes no longer wavered. Across the room, So-woo exhaled softly and closed his eyes with a faint smile. The fight, once lost, was turning back in their favor. Nam-jin's body lay motionless. Sun-joo, still shaky, pushed herself up and stumbled toward the laptop. So-woo dragged himself over, his breath still uneven. The password had already been entered, but the final transfer required a fingerprint. Sun-joo carefully lifted Nam-jin's hand and pressed his finger to the scanner. Seconds passed. Then, "Access granted" appeared on the screen. Both of them exhaled at once. But there was no time to rest. Outside, the faint sound of car engines and footsteps began to creep closer. So-woo reached for her hand. "We have to go. Now." They slipped out through the back door, where a car sent by Jin-jung-bae was waiting in the alley. Before stepping in, Sun-joo turned for one last glance. Nam-jin was still breathing, his pale face barely visible in the shadows. She said nothing, just turned away. And together, they disappeared into the night. Police arrived at the warehouse and began their sweep, guided by the rescue team sent by Jin-jung-bae. They searched from the back door to the front, but there was no sign of Pai Sun-joo, no Kim So-woo, and no Nam-jin. The laptop was powered off, and on the floor, only a bloodied iron pipe remained. Someone was definitely here, one officer said quietly, but strangely. There were no clear signs of anyone being dragged out. How had Nam-jin vanished when he had been unconscious just hours earlier? His blood was still visible, and broken restraints lay behind a chair. Police sealed the area and began a full forensic inspection. In the car outside, Jin-jung-bae sat in silence. He said nothing, but his face was calculating every possibility, every scenario. This isn't over. The words were never spoken aloud, but the tension in the air spoke for itself. A year had passed. Jin Construction was back on track, and Pai Sun-joo had quietly returned to her work, stronger than before. So-woo stayed by her side, and though their days seemed ordinary, they found comfort in each other's quiet presence. But even in peaceful routines, a subtle fear lingered, never fully gone. A strange shadow in a parking garage, an unfamiliar number on a phone screen, a sense that someone, somewhere, might still be watching. That night, Sun-joo found an envelope in the mailbox. No sender, only her name written neatly on the front. She hesitated, then carefully opened it. Inside, just one sentence. But that single line brushed against her heart like a cold breath of air. Sun-joo quietly opened the envelope. A single sheet of soft paper rustled at her fingertips, the faint scent of ink still clinging to it. She furrowed her brow slightly, then slowly unfolded the letter. Inside, a short sentence was written, each letter carefully pressed into the page. But she didn't read it right away. Something told her. Once she saw those words, there'd be no turning back. She took a breath, eyes hovering just above the text. Then, a sound. Footsteps outside her door. She instinctively folded the paper and hid it in her hand. Someone was coming up the stairs. The footsteps were strangely familiar, and yet unsettling. The letter remained clenched in her palm. Its message, not yet spoken aloud, still echoed inside her chest. Since that day, Sun-joo became more sensitive to the smallest changes. A stranger in the elevator. A black car parked too long outside the office. A glance that lingered a little too long. They all seemed like coincidences. But her instinct whispered otherwise. Something was starting again. So Woo felt it too. Looking out the window of his office. The street looked the same, but the air was different. It had been a year since Nam-jin vanished. And now, for the first time, it felt like he might not be gone at all. He glanced at a photo of him and Sun-joo on his desk, then quietly picked up the phone. Sun-joo, don't you feel it too? Something's off. She paused. Yeah. It feels like someone's watching us. It wasn't paranoia. It was the sense that a story they thought was over was starting to turn its next page. Lately, Jin Jung-bae had been feeling it too. That strange, uneasy shift in the air. Among the cluttered stacks of documents on his desk, his hand kept returning to one old file. He hadn't meant to touch it again. It was the file he'd sealed a year ago, after Nam-jin disappeared. But today felt different. Both Sun-joo and So-woo sensed it. And he knew it wasn't just fear. He slowly pulled out the file, wiping dust from the cover. In red letters, it read, Confidential Tracking. Inside were records of overseas call logs, Bitcoin transaction trails, and flagged attempts at border crossings. He adjusted his glasses, turning the pages one by one. Then, on the last page, a single screenshot. An email. No listed sender. But its subject line was unmistakable. Familiar. Chilling. It begins again. The Seoul Cyber Investigation Unit received an anonymous tip. No message. Just a single video link. The footage appeared to be from a back alley somewhere in Southeast Asia. The quality was poor, but the figure walking through the frame, avoiding the camera, looked familiar. He wore a black cap and sunglasses. But for a split second, as he passed close to the camera, his face turned, just enough to be caught. Investigators extracted a still and ran it through facial recognition. Result: 96.3% match. The structure, the features, nearly identical to Nam Jin. The footage had been picked up by a CCTV system in a known black market district. The timestamp? Just 3 days ago. The report reached Jin Jung Bae immediately. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "He's alive." Just as I thought. When Sun-joo got the call from Jin Jung Bae, she said nothing for a long moment. The words on the other end were simple. Nam Jin is alive. But that sentence dragged every buried memory back to the surface. The warehouse. The fear in her hand as she raised the stone. The last glimpse of him as they walked away. She inhaled deeply, eyes closed, staring out the window. The sky was gray, and dust had gathered quietly on the windowsill. Everything she'd built, her peace, her silence, shook again. All because of one name. But this wasn't fear. Nam Jin's name didn't just mean danger. It meant a war that had never truly ended. She opened her eyes slowly, reaching for the letter on her desk. This time, she was ready to read the final line. Sun-joo carefully unfolded the letter on her desk. The paper still curled softly at the edges, and the words were just as they had been that night. But this time, she didn't look away. She read each letter, one by one. "I'll be back." It was just one line, but it hit her like lightning. Nam Jin was alive. And now, he wasn't hiding. He was promising to return. Quietly. Precisely. At the moment he chose. Sun-joo clenched her fingers, folded the letter, and placed it back into the drawer. Then she stood, eyes fixed on the world beyond the window. It looked calm, but her gaze had changed. "So come back. This time, I'll be the one to finish it." No one heard her words. But from that moment forward, the story had already begun again. At the same time, So-woo found a letter waiting on his desk. No return address. Same paper. Same handwriting. He opened the envelope slowly and unfolded the sheet. "I'll be back." The words echoed in his eyes, but his face remained still. He wasn't surprised. In truth, not once since that night had he truly believed Nam Jin was dead. So-woo folded the letter and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He turned his gaze to the window, watching the quiet city below. He didn't think to call Sun-joo. He knew she'd already made her choice. But his own path, it would be different. Same enemy, different weapons. And now, the fight was beginning again. On two sides. In a luxury hotel suite somewhere in Southeast Asia. The city lights shimmered beyond the window. Inside, a man sat calmly at a laptop. He wore a tailored suit, hair neatly combed. The name on his badge read D.K. Han. He passed a fingerprint scan, accessing an encrypted network. Funds had recently flowed into one of his accounts. Some rerouted toward political channels. Beside him, multiple passports, credit cards under aliases, and a freshly printed business proposal. He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on a monitor displaying two familiar faces. Pai Sun-joo, Kim So-woo. Their images were crossed in red. I've come back. But I'm not the same Nam Jin anymore. His voice was soft, but the certainty in his tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a return. It was the beginning of a new war.